Hello and welcome to Whispers of the Night. Tonight, you are about to step into a world where the trees speak, where nature breathes, and where calm and wonder fill every moment. Take a deep breath, let your shoulders release, and allow your mind to quiet. You are safe here, in this space of stillness and gentle attention. Before the story begins, make yourself comfortable. Let the day's worries drift away and allow yourself to simply be present. If you enjoy this journey, consider subscribing to Whispers of the Night to join us in discovering more stories of calm, wonder, and peaceful reflection. Now, let's enter the forest together, where every leaf carries a secret and every root hums with memory. Close your eyes and begin to notice your breathing. In and out, in and out. Feel the air fill your lungs and then release, carrying away tension and fatigue. Imagine yourself stepping softly into a forest, the ground beneath your feet warm and alive. The scent of earth, moss, and leaves surrounds you, grounding you, connecting you to every living thing here above. Sunlight filters through branches, casting golden patterns on the forest floor. Each leaf trembles in a gentle breeze, whispering quietly as if inviting you to listen. Let your body relax with every breath, sinking deeper into calm. Let your mind release every thought that does not serve you. Now, feel the gentle pulse of the earth beneath you, the rhythm of roots and soil, the memory of every tree reaching upward toward the sky. Notice the silence around you, a silence that is not empty, but full of life. Every sound, every movement is part of this rhythm, inviting your awareness to slow, to expand, to rest. Allow yourself to be fully present here. You are safe. You are calm. And now, gently, the story of the secret language of trees begins. The secret language of trees. The forest that breathes. Dawn arrived without announcement, as it often did in the village where Virel lived. The light did not burst into being or scatter shadows dramatically. It seeped in, pale and deliberate, touching the edges of rooftops and the thin smoke rising from early hearth fires. Virel woke before the birds finished deciding their songs. She lay still for a moment, listening to the familiar quiet wood settling, distant water moving over stones, the hush that belonged only to early morning. It was in this hour, before voices filled the air, that she felt most herself. She dressed slowly, choosing clothes worn soft by time, and stepped outside while the world was still learning how to breathe again. The path toward the forest waited at the edge of the village, narrow and half forgotten, as though it existed for those who noticed such things. Virel followed it without thinking. Her feet knew the way better than her thoughts did. The forest rose gently from the land, Its trees gathered close together like a patient assembly. Towering oaks anchored the space with deep, steady presence, while silver-barked birches caught the dawn light and reflected it back in thin, shifting lines. Mist lingered low among the roots, moving slowly, as if unsure whether to leave or stay. Virel paused at the threshold, as she always did, placing her palm briefly against the nearest trunk. The bark was cool, faintly damp, and alive beneath her touch. As she stepped inside, the air changed. It grew heavier, richer, carrying the scent of moss, old leaves, and something quieter, something like memory. The forest did not feel asleep, nor awake in the way people were awake. It felt aware. Virel moved carefully, not out of fear, but out of respect, as though each step was a word in a language she did not fully speak. At first, everything seemed as it always had. Light filtered through branches in thin, patient ribbons. Leaves trembled faintly, though no breeze stirred them. A distant bird called once, then fell silent. Virel walked deeper, following no path except the one that formed beneath her feet. Her thoughts softened, loosening their grip, until they drifted like leaves on still water. Then she noticed the rhythm. It was subtle enough that she almost dismissed it as imagination, a gentle rise and fall in the air around her. The forest seemed to inhale, the light dimming slightly, shadows drawing closer. Then it exhaled, and everything eased open again. The movement was slow, ancient, and unmistakably alive. Virel stopped walking. Her heart mirrored the rhythm before she realized it had changed. Slowing to match what surrounded her, she listened. The sound was not audible in the usual sense. There was no wind rushing through branches, no creak or groan. It was a feeling, a pressure that came and went, like standing beside a sleeping animal, large enough to be mistaken for a hill. The trees were breathing. Virel felt a quiet awe settle over her. She had always known the forest was alive, but this was different. This was not metaphor, or feeling it was presence. Awareness brushed against her thoughts, gentle and curious. She felt watched, yes, but not as prey or intruder. It was the way one feels noticed by an old friend after a long silence. She took a tentative step forward. The rhythm did not break. Another step, and the light shifted, adjusting itself around her as though making space. Her breath caught, not from fear, but from the sudden certainty that she had crossed into something deliberate. The forest was not merely existing around her. It was responding. Memories stirred unbidden. Virel recalled moments from her childhood times. She had wandered here alone, speaking to trees without embarrassment, pressing her ear to trunks to listen for stories she could not name. She remembered the way her grandmother had smiled at this, neither encouraging nor discouraging, only saying that some people were born with ears meant for quieter things. Virel had not thought much of it then. Now, standing in a forest that breathed, those words returned with new weight. The ground beneath her feet felt warm despite the morning chill. Roots surfaced like veins, guiding her steps. She followed them deeper into a place where the oaks stood older and closer together, their branches woven into a high, living canopy. Here, the rhythm grew stronger. Each breath of the forest seemed to pass through her as well, filling her chest with a calm so profound it bordered on reverence. She knelt and placed both hands on the earth. The soil pulsed faintly, steady and sure. For a moment, her thoughts dissolved entirely. There was only the rhythm, the rise and fall, the endless exchange between root and sky. Images flickered behind her closed eyes, not visions exactly, but impressions. Rings forming within trunks, seasons turning like pages. Storms endured, fires remembered, regrowth patient and inevitable. Virel did not know how long she stayed there. Time felt irrelevant, a human invention that did not apply in this place. Eventually, she became aware of something else, something like a question hovering gently at the edge of her awareness. It did not arrive in words. It arrived as feeling, recognition seeking, acknowledgement. "I hear you," she whispered, her voice barely more than breath. The forest seemed to exhale more deeply then, the light softening, shadows stretching in long, tender lines. A sense of quiet affirmation settled around her, not triumphant or demanding, but warm. Virel felt tears gather at the corners of her eyes. Surprised by their suddenness, she did not wipe them away. They fell into the soil, absorbed without trace. When she finally rose, the forest's rhythm continued, steady as ever. Nothing dramatic had changed, and yet everything had. She felt as though she had been listening to a song all her life without realizing it had lyrics. Now she could almost understand their shape as she made her way back toward the village. The trees seemed to lean subtly inward, branches overlapping in a gentle arch. Leaves shimmered faintly, catching the light in patterns that felt intentional. Virel walked slowly, committing each sensation to memory, the scent, the rhythm, the feeling of being known. At the forest's edge, she paused once more and turned back. The breathing was still there, quieter now, like a sleeper at rest. She placed her hand against the nearest birch, feeling the pulse beneath its pale bark. "I'll listen," she said softly. The forest did not answer in words, but the rhythm remained, patient and enduring, as it had always been. Virel stepped back into the waking world, carrying the breath of the trees with her, knowing this was only the beginning of a language she had been learning her entire life. Whispers beneath the bark. The forest welcomed Virel back without ceremony. There was no threshold she could point to this time, no clear line where the ordinary world ended and something deeper began. Instead, the transition unfolded gently, as if the forest had learned her pace and adjusted itself to match it. The air felt warmer here, heavier with the scent of damp earth and green growth. Moss softened every surface, spreading across stones and roots like a patient hand smoothing wrinkles from old skin. She followed no path, only a quiet pull she felt beneath her ribs, guiding her toward a grove she had not noticed before. The trees here stood closer together, their trunks thick and aged, marked with knots, spirals, and long, slow scars that told stories without words. Light barely reached the ground, filtering through layers of leaves until it arrived muted and green, as though it had passed through water. Virell slowed her steps. This place asked for it. Each movement felt amplified, each breath an intrusion unless taken with care. The forest did not breathe as openly here as it had before. Its rhythm was deeper, more inward, like a whisper shared close to the chest. She stopped before a massive trunk, rising from the moss like a pillar grown rather than built. Its bark was dark and ridged, twisted into patterns that drew her eye again and again. Spirals curved inward, overlapping and diverging, as if something beneath the surface had once turned slowly, shaping the wood from within. Virel lifted her hand and rested her palm against it. At first, there was only warmth, not the warmth of sunlit bark, but something deeper, held and retained over time. It seeped into her skin, up her arm, settling into her bones. She closed her eyes without thinking. The forest hushed further, as if leaning closer. Then came the murmurs. They did not arrive as sound. Her ears caught nothing unusual, no rustle, no voice, no breath, not her own. Instead, the sensation rose inside her, blooming behind her eyes and along her spine. A pressure, gentle but insistent, like a memory she could not quite place. Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with something heavier and older. Images surfaced in fragments, rain soaking into roots, sunlight filtering through younger leaves long since fallen, the slow ache of winter frost. These impressions overlapped and folded into one another, carrying emotion without narrative durance, patience, sorrow without sharpness, joy without urgency. Virel's breath caught, she realized, with a clarity that left no room for doubt, that the tree was sharing itself with her, not speaking. Remembering, she leaned closer, pressing her forehead lightly against the bark. The contact deepened the sensation. The murmurs grew stronger, no louder, but more present, filling the spaces inside her that words often occupied. She felt grief that did not belong to her, vast and slow, like a river that had been flowing so long it no longer remembered its source. She felt moments of connection roots brushing against one another underground, sharing water, warning, support. The forest beneath the forest revealed itself, a network of feeling and awareness stretching farther than she could imagine. Tears slid down her cheeks without resistance. They came not from sadness alone, but from recognition. This was a language she had always brushed against without knowing its shape. The reason silence had always felt fuller to her than speech. The reason places spoke louder than people ever had. The whispers shifted. She felt herself being noticed more distinctly now, not merely as a presence, but as an individual thread entering the weave. The tree's awareness pressed back, curious, cautious, ancient. Virel understood then that this exchange was not automatic. It was an offering, extended because she had listened before asking. Her heartbeat slowed. She focused on the contact between skin and bark, on the subtle vibrations humming beneath the surface. They were faint, almost imperceptible, yet steady. She sensed how they traveled through wood, through root, through soil carrying, meaning the way sound carried meaning for humans. But this meaning was broader, layered with time and experience rather than definition. "I don't know how to answer," she whispered. Though she was no longer certain, whispering mattered. The response came as a gentle easing of pressure, reassurance without instruction. Understanding was not required. Presence was enough. Virel sank to the moss at the base of the trunk, keeping one hand against it. The ground cradled her, soft and yielding. Around her, other trees stood in quiet communion, their trunks marked by similar spirals and knots. She sensed their awareness, brushing against the exchange, not intruding, simply acknowledging. This grove was not a collection of individuals. It was a gathering of memory. Time. Stretched Virel became aware of smaller sensations. Insects moving beneath the moss. The faint tug of roots drawing moisture upward. The subtle shift of weight as the tree adjusted itself, responding to forces far below the surface. Each movement carried intention, though not conscious in the way humans understood it. It was a knowing shaped by survival and connection rather than thought, she wondered. Distantly, how many had passed through this place without sensing any of it? How many had brushed bark with careless hands, heard only silence? The thought did not bring sadness. The forest did not begrudge being unheard. It waited. As the exchange softened, the murmurs faded into a gentle aftertaste of emotion, lingering like warmth after contact. Virel opened her eyes. The grove looked unchanged, yet she knew she was not. The spirals in the bark seemed clearer now, less decorative and more deliberate, like script written for those who could feel rather than read. She stood slowly, reluctant to break the connection too quickly. When she lifted her hand from the trunk, the warmth lingered on her palm. For a moment, she felt unmoored, as though she had stepped out of deep water and onto land that moved differently. She placed both feet firmly on the ground, breathing until her balance returned. Before leaving, she bowed her head, not in reverence, but in acknowledgement. The forest did not respond outwardly, yet she felt a subtle settling, as if something had been placed gently back where it belonged. As she walked away, the whispers did not follow her. They remained in the grove, held within bark and root and soil. But the understanding stayed. Virel now knew that the forest's language was not meant to be overheard like a secret. It was meant to be felt, carried, remembered. When she reached the edge of the grove, she paused and looked back once more. The trees stood as they always had, silent to the unlistening eye. Virel turned away, her steps steady, her chest full. The forest had spoken without sound, and she had learned how to listen. Roots that remember. The clearing revealed itself slowly, as if it had been waiting for Virel to notice the way the forest's attention subtly shifted. There was no sudden opening in the trees, no dramatic break in the canopy. Instead, the ground began to change beneath her feet, rising and folding in gentle curves until the soil gave way to exposed roots, thick and intertwined, lifting themselves from the earth like veins close to the surface of skin. Virel stopped at the edge of the clearing, breath held in quiet recognition. The air felt older here, not stale, but weighted, as though it carried the accumulated hours of centuries without ever releasing them. Light filtered down in pale strands, catching on the smooth, worn curves of roots polished by time and weather. The forest's rhythm slowed, deepened, settling into something vast and contemplative. She stepped forward carefully. The roots formed natural paths, winding and branching, guiding her movement with subtle insistence. Each one felt solid beneath her soles, warm despite their exposure, alive with a slow pulse she had come to recognize. As she walked, her awareness widened, stretching beyond her body, drawn downward into the labyrinth beneath the surface. She knelt and rested her fingers against a root thicker than her arm. The contact sent a tremor through her, not sharp, not startling, but profound. Her surroundings dimmed, not because the light faded, but because her attention was being drawn inward, carried along channels older than memory. The first echo arrived like distant thunder. She felt the sky darken, clouds gathering with relentless patience. Wind tore through branches, bending trunks until fibers strained and groaned. Rain fell in sheets, cold and heavy, soaking the ground until roots drank deep. Virel felt the forest brace itself, not in fear, but in endurance. Trees leaned into the storm together, sharing strain through the web beneath the soil, distributing the weight of survival. The sensation shifted, and heat replaced cold. Fire swept through undergrowth, fast and hungry, devouring what lay in its path. Virel felt the searing loss, the crackle of life undone, but also the forest's restraint. Older trees held firm, their bark scarred but unbroken. Beneath the flames, roots carried warnings, urging sap to retreat, life to pull inward. Afterward came silence, thick and aching, followed by the slow, inevitable push of green through ash. Time blurred, seasons turned like pages, one folding into the next without clear boundary. Virel felt centuries pass, not as years, but as weight growth layered upon growth, memory upon memory. Creatures came and went. Hooves pressed the soil, claws dug shallow dens. Human hands touched bark in wonder or desperation, cutting, carving, sheltering, wounding. Each contact left an imprint, absorbed and stored without judgment. Sorrow surfaced, vast and quiet. Trees fell not, always to age or storm, but to blades and fire, guided by need or neglect. Virel felt the loss ripple outward, roots tightening, shifting, redistributing life to fill sudden emptiness. The forest mourned, not loudly, but thoroughly, holding absence as carefully as presence. Even decay became memory, nourishing what came after. Her chest tightened, breath shallow, as the weight of it pressed against her awareness. She understood, then, that the forest did not forget, because forgetting served no purpose. Memory was survival. Memory was continuity. She became aware of herself again, kneeling in the clearing, hands trembling against the root. Tears blurred her vision, though she had not felt them form. They dripped onto the exposed wood, soaking in slowly. The forest did not recoil. If anything, the connection deepened, as if recognizing in her the capacity to hold what it carried. More echoes surfaced, gentler now. Children laughing at the forest's edge, lovers carving initials into bark, their promises long since dissolved into time. Elders resting beneath branches, finding peace in shade they had known since youth. These moments glowed briefly, then settled into the vast archive beneath the soil. Preserved without hierarchy, each life given equal weight. Virel sensed how the roots intertwined, not only within this clearing, but stretching far beyond it, connecting distant groves, hillsides, and valleys. The forest was not a single place, but a body with many limbs, each part remembering for the whole. What happened in one corner was felt everywhere, if faintly, carried along these living channels. A realization settled over her with quiet certainty. The forest was not merely alive, it was conscious of its own continuity. It remembered because it endured, and it endured because it remembered. She withdrew her hand slowly. The echoes softened, but did not vanish. They lingered within her, layered impressions settling into her own memory. She felt heavier, but also steadier, as though she had been entrusted with something fragile and immense. Standing, she followed one of the root paths deeper into the clearing. The exposed veins curved upward, forming low arches and gentle ridges. Walking among them felt like moving through the ribs of something vast and sleeping. Each step carried reverence, not because she feared breaking something, but because she understood how much was held here. At the center of the clearing, the roots converged, thick and knotted, rising from the ground in a tangled mass. Virel approached, drawn by a gravity that felt less like force and more like invitation. She placed both palms against the convergence and closed her eyes. This time, the forest did not show her images. Instead, it offered silence deep. In that silence was acceptance. The forest did not ask her to remember everything it held. It asked only that she know it remembered. Virel bowed her head, breath steady, heart full. She felt the sorrow still, but it no longer overwhelmed her. It had shape now, context, belonging. The forest's grief was not despair. It was a testament to care extended across ages. When she finally turned away, the clearing seemed unchanged. Roots lay exposed as before. Light filtered gently, the air heavy with quiet. Yet, Virel carried the weight of centuries within her, not as burden, but as grounding. As she left, the roots beneath the soil shifted almost imperceptibly, settling back into their endless work of holding, sharing, remembering. The forest continued its vigil, a living archive beneath the world, and Virel walked on, knowing she had become part of its memory as well. The language of seasons. The forest did not change abruptly, nor did it ever announce itself as something new. Its transformations arrived quietly, layered gently upon what already existed, so that only those who remained long enough could sense the shift. Virel walked beneath the canopy with unhurried steps, aware that something subtle was unfolding around her, something that could not be grasped through attention alone, but required patience, repetition, and trust. At first, the difference lived in the light. Sunbeams filtered through the leaves with a softened quality, lingering rather than striking, warming without demanding notice. Green deepened into gold, then drifted toward amber and rust, each hue emerging gradually, as though the forest were translating its thoughts slowly to avoid misunderstanding. Virel felt the change against her skin, a cooler presence settling where heat once lingered. She returned often, no longer guided by curiosity but by familiarity. The trees felt mid-conversation now, and she understood that listening meant showing up again and again without expectation. The path beneath her feet thickened with fallen leaves, their edges curling inward, their surfaces dulled by time and moisture. Each step carried a quiet sound, but the forest did not recoil. It absorbed her presence the way it absorbed rain. Autumn unfolded without sorrow. Leaves loosened their hold and drifted downward in unhurried arcs, surrendering to gravity without hesitation. Virel paused to watch them fall, noticing how none resisted, none clung desperately to their branches. They released because the moment had arrived, not because they were forced. She knelt and lifted a leaf from the forest floor. Its surface was cool, its veins etched clearly, a map of nourishment and time. She sensed the tree's awareness withdrawing inward, drawing energy away from what would soon be unnecessary. This was not loss. It was intention. The forest spoke then, not through sound, but through understanding. Let go when holding no longer serves. Rest is not abandonment. Stillness carries meaning. As the days shortened, the air sharpened. Morning mist lingered between trunks, clinging gently to bark and branch. The forest floor grew thick with layered leaves, forming a quiet cushion that softened sound and movement. Trees stood more exposed now, their forms revealed without foliage, strong and unembellished. Virel felt comfort in their honesty. Walking among them, she sensed something within herself release its grip, the pressure to remain full, productive, constantly reaching, eased. The forest did not apologize for its bareness. It did not explain its pause. It simply stood, confident in its structure. Winter arrived without ceremony. Frost traced delicate patterns along stone and bark, fragile yet precise. Snow followed, falling slowly, settling into branches and hollows until the forest was wrapped in silence. Sound diminished until even breath felt intrusive. Virel moved carefully, each step softened by white stillness. The trees did not appear alive in ways she had been taught to recognize, yet she felt their presence more deeply than ever. Beneath frozen soil, roots continued their patient communication, sharing warmth, memory, and endurance. Life retreated inward, conserving, trusting. Virel pressed her gloved hand to a trunk and sensed the faintest pulse beneath the cold. It was enough. The forest did not resist winter. It did not mourn the absence of growth or question the retreat of light. It remembered their return, and that memory was sufficient. Nights stretched long. Days remained pale and brief. Still, despair never touched the land. Waiting filled the space, instead, vast and untroubled. Virel sensed how many winters had passed like this before, how survival had been shaped not by struggle, but by patience repeated across centuries. The lesson arrived quietly. Endurance does not require movement. Sometimes, survival is simply remaining. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the forest shifted again. Ice loosened its hold. Snow thinned and retreated into soil. Water began to move, dripping from branches, sinking into ground long held closed. Beneath the surface, roots stirred. Virel felt it before she saw it, a readiness rising gently through the land. Spring did not burst into being. It unfolded. Rain fell softly, soaking the earth, loosening what had rested too long. Buds swelled along branches, tentative at first, then certain. Green returned in small gestures, a leaf here, a shoot there, until the forest breathed openly once more. Its rhythm expanded, steady and generous. Virel stood beneath the rain, eyes closed, letting droplets trace paths along her face. The forest felt lighter now, not because it had forgotten winter, but because it carried it forward. What had fallen nourished what rose. What had rested now reached again. Understanding settled fully within her. The forest's language was not hidden beneath bark alone. It lived in change itself. Each season formed a sentence. Each transformation carried meaning. Autumn spoke of release without regret. Winter spoke of endurance without bitterness. Spring spoke of renewal without haste. Summer, when it returned, would speak of abundance without fear. Varel walked the same paths through each shift, watching how familiar spaces revealed new truths depending on light, temperature, and time. Nothing remained fixed. Nothing needed to. The forest did not cling to what had been. It honored it, then continued. As months passed, her thoughts softened. Worry loosened its hold. Loss no longer felt final, but transitional, part of a larger rhythm she now trusted. The forest had endured far more than she ever would, and it remained. One evening, standing beneath branches newly heavy with leaves, Virel felt the entire cycle settle within her at once. Past and present overlapped. Everything belonged. She placed her hand against the earth, grounding herself in its steady patience. The forest did not promise ease. It promised continuity, and in that promise, Virel found peace. When humans forget to listen. The forest thinned gradually, not by accident, but by intention long past. Virel felt the change before she saw it, a loosening in the air, a subtle ache that pressed against her chest as the trees began to stand farther apart. Light reached the ground to easily hear, falling without resistance, illuminating spaces that felt exposed rather than welcoming. The rhythm she had grown accustomed to slowed, faltered, then steadied again, quieter than before. She walked toward the edge where the forest met memory. Stumps emerged among the roots, their surfaces weathered and pale, marked by rings that no longer grew. Some were wide enough to sit upon, others narrow and jagged, remnants of younger lives cut short. Moss crept over them carefully, as if trying to soften what could not be undone. Virel stopped beside one and rested her hand against its surface. It was cool, lifeless in ways that still carried presence. Here, the forest did not whisper as it had before. It did not press images into her mind or guide her awareness gently inward. Instead, a quiet heaviness settled around her, measured and restrained. This place did not cry out. It endured. She felt the memory of sound linger faintly, echoes of axes striking wood, of sharp impacts breaking rhythms that had stood uninterrupted for centuries. The forest remembered these moments, not as violence alone, but as interruption, breath cut short, connections severed, silence introduced where none had existed before. Virel closed her eyes. The sorrow she felt was not sudden or overwhelming. It was slow, layered, patient. The trees did not rage against what had happened. They carried grief the way they carried time, accepting it as something that could not be shed but could be held. She sensed fear beneath the sorrow, subtle and persistent, not fear of pain or destruction alone, but fear of erasure, of being reduced to silence, not because they no longer lived, but because no one remembered how to listen. The forest's awareness brushed against her carefully here, hesitant, as though unsure whether sharing this weight was welcome. Varel remained still, offering no demand, only presence. Gradually, the connection deepened. She felt moments when humans had entered this space without listening, driven by need, by hunger, by progress defined without patience. She felt the confusion of roots suddenly exposed to air, the shock of light where shade had always lived. She felt trees falling, not in panic, but in resignation, trusting that something might yet remain. The forest did not condemn these acts. It remembered them. Virel understood then that memory itself was the forest's defense. Even loss became part of the living record, carried forward through root and soil. Through what survived and what grew afterward, she walked slowly among the stumps, each one a pause in the land's sentence. Some had begun to nurture new growth at their edges, shoots rising cautiously from decayed wood. Others remained bare, their stories unfinished. The forest did not force renewal, it allowed it. A realization settled into Virel with quiet certainty. The trees did not need a voice. They did not need someone to translate their language into human words. They feared something far simpler and far heavier, being ignored entirely. Listening, she understood, was not passive. It was an act of relationship. The forest did not ask her to stand before others and speak on its behalf. It did not want representation. It wanted remembrance. It wanted humans to return to a way of being that noticed rhythm, that paused before cutting, that felt before deciding. Virel felt her role clarify within her, not as a burden, but as alignment. She was not meant to shout warnings or carry messages carved into speech. She was meant to live in a way that reminded others how to quiet themselves. She imagined humans standing at the forest's edge, not with tools raised, but with hands open, waiting long enough to feel what she felt now. She imagined listening becoming instinct again, not learned, not taught, but remembered. The forest's fear softened slightly at this understanding, easing into something like cautious hope. It did not expect change quickly. It did not demand resolution. It accepted that forgetting was part of the human condition, just as remembering was part of its own. Virel knelt beside one of the largest stumps and pressed her palm to the soil beside it. Beneath the surface, roots still moved, still shared, still held what had been lost without discarding it. The forest had not abandoned this place. It waited. She felt a gentle reassurance rise through the ground. Not gratitude, not relief, but acknowledgement. She had listened. That was enough. Standing, she took one last look at the scarred edge of the forest. Light spilled freely here, illuminating what had been taken as well as what remained. The land did not hide its wounds. It carried them openly, trusting time to do what force could not. As Virel turned back toward the deeper woods, the rhythm strengthened again, subtle but present. The forest breathed more fully where it was whole, yet it did not abandon what was broken. Everything belonged to its memory. She walked on, knowing now that listening was not a skill to be mastered, but a state to be returned to. And as long as someone remembered how to listen, the forest would never be truly silent. the keeper of green voices. Virel climbed the hill in the first light of dawn, the earth soft beneath her feet, damp with dew and the quiet remnants of night. Mist drifted lazily between the treetops below, curling through branches and settling in pockets that caught the first rays of the rising sun. The forest stretched beneath her like a living tapestry, a vast expanse of green threaded with silver light and shadow, each leaf and branch holding centuries of presence. She had walked these woods countless times, yet from this vantage point, the whole of them felt alive in a new way, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath for her arrival. She paused on the slope, feeling the grass bend beneath her soles, and inhaled deeply the scent of moss, damp bark, and the faint sweetness of flowering buds mingling with the crispness of the morning air. It was here, above the forest, that Virel understood the fullness of what she had learned. The forest had taught her to listen, to feel, to understand without requiring words. It had shared its breath, its memories, its rhythms, and now, standing above the canopy, she felt the weight and the gift of that knowledge settle into her chest. She was not just a wanderer among trees. She was a participant in their continuity, a keeper of their voice, however quiet that voice might be. The forest had entrusted her with something that could not be written down or spoken in ordinary conversation. It was an understanding that lived in attention, in presence. In the deliberate act of noticing, the sun climbed higher, brushing the mist with soft gold, and Virel closed her eyes, letting warmth seep into her skin. She could feel the pulse of the trees below, steady and patient, threading through the soil, rising through roots and trunks and branches. Each movement was subtle, yet undeniable, a rhythm that had carried through centuries, through storms, through fires, through the careless hand of humans who had once forgotten how to listen. Virel felt the echoes of those times still alive in the soil, in the ridges of bark, in the twists of ancient roots. The forest's memory was patient and thorough. It carried what humans had forgotten, and it endured nonetheless. She opened her eyes to the horizon, where the sun painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, streaking clouds like brushstrokes across a living canvas. A gentle breeze moved across the hilltop, carrying with it the scents and whispers of the forest below. The sound was not audible in any conventional sense, yet Virel felt it through the subtle vibrations along the soles of her feet, in the way the mist shifted across her skin, in the quiet certainty that the forest was aware of her presence. She felt a profound connection, not only to the trees themselves, but to the vast history they carried. The storms survived, the roots interwoven beneath the soil, the countless seasons. Every leaf and every trunk was a page in a story that had no beginning or end, only a continuous thread of living memory. Virel knelt on the dew-soaked grass, placing her hands against the soil, feeling its warmth, its pulse. She thought of every lesson the forest had shared, the subtle language of leaves trembling without wind, the whispered memory carried along roots, the cycles of seasons speaking in time rather than in sound. She had learned that the forest did not need a voice in human terms. Its language was patience, endurance, and transformation. Its voice lived in change, in memory, in the way life endured and renewed itself endlessly. And now, that voice lived within her as well, rising, she looked once more across the forest, noting the patterns of light and shadow, the way mist curled around treetops, the gentle sway of branches reaching toward the sun. Every detail seemed deliberate, a subtle communication of balance, of continuity, of the intimate knowledge that the forest had held for millennia. Virel felt the responsibility of this knowledge settle on her shoulders, not as a weight to bear with anxiety, but as a mantle of gentle power, a quiet authority that demanded only attentiveness and care. She was a bridge, not a messenger. She was not meant to speak for the forest, but to embody its lessons, to move through the human world with the memory of its patience and rhythm alive within her. She began to descend the hill, letting her gaze trace the contours of the land, noting where the trees were thinned, where new shoots rose among old stumps, where roots intertwined in a tapestry of support and survival. The forest did not rush her, nor did it demand perfection. Its approval was quiet, expressed in the steady rhythm of its pulse, in the way light and mist shifted around her steps, in the subtle warmth that lingered beneath her palms when she touched bark or stone. Every movement felt deliberate, a conversation without words. She sensed that as long as she moved with awareness, she was participating in that dialogue, sustaining it. As she approached the edge of the village, the familiar sights of rooftops and smoke rising from chimneys were softened by the memory of the forest she carried within her. She walked slowly, aware of how different her perception had become. Trees were no longer mere scenery or resources. They were beings with depth, with memory, with patience that far exceeded human recklessness. Every human structure she passed now felt connected to a larger landscape, and she understood how easy it was to forget, how much humans had forgotten, and how vital it was to remember. The memory of listening, of noticing, of honoring presence rather than taking it for granted was a fragile gift in a world that often prioritized action over awareness. Virel paused by the edge of the village, turning back once more toward the forest. The mist had begun to thin as the sun climbed higher, revealing the vast expanse of green stretching as far as her eyes could reach. She felt the quiet approval of the trees, a hum that was not sound but understanding, a gentle acknowledgement that she had accepted her place within their world. She had not spoken aloud, she had not issued proclamations, yet the forest recognized her fidelity, her willingness to carry its language within her, to move through the human world without erasing or altering its truths. As she stepped back into the village paths, she felt the subtle differences in the way the air moved, the way the sounds of human activity blended into the natural rhythm she had internalized. The clatter of carts over cobblestones, the distant laughter of children, the low murmur of conversation, all of it was filtered through her awareness of the forest. She could perceive the way energy moved, where care or neglect had left marks, where attention had created patterns of harmony or dissonance. Virel felt a responsibility to carry this awareness gently, without imposing it, simply by living in alignment with what she had learned. Her first steps into the village market brought her close to the smells of fresh bread, of earth and herbs, of animals stirring. The ordinary world seemed louder now, more chaotic, yet she moved through it with a steady presence, grounded in the memory of roots, of seasons, of the pulse of living things. People passed her without noticing the shift within her, yet she felt it radiate quietly. Her posture, her gaze, the careful patience of her movements, all of it spoke without speech. She understood that the forest had entrusted her not to shout or preach, but to embody. Presence itself could remind humans how to listen. She paused beside a small fountain, letting the water spill over her fingers. The ripple of liquid across stone echoed the pulse of the forest she carried within her, subtle and constant. Virel thought of the trees on the distant hill, of mist curling like soft breath around the canopy. She felt their quiet encouragement, their unspoken blessing. Each drop of water mirrored the rhythm of life she had learned from the forest, the patience of growth, the necessity of endurance, the certainty of renewal. The day advanced slowly, but Virel moved with deliberate calm. Each task she performed a meditation, each action a reinforcement of the lessons she had received. She tended to small gardens, spoke gently to animals she encountered, moved through human spaces without haste. Even her interactions with other people carried the weight of presence rather than words. She no longer needed to explain. She simply existed in alignment with the forest's memory and rhythm. Later, as the sun climbed higher and warmed the village paths, Virel walked toward the well at the village center, pausing to observe the interplay of shadow and light among the trees planted along the streets. She could feel subtle vibrations in the ground, tiny pulses from roots reaching beneath walls and stones, as if even fragments of forest were communicating through what humans had yet to understand. She did not touch them. She simply acknowledged their presence. Listening, she realized, was a state of awareness, an act of attention extended beyond oneself. When she finally returned to her small home at the edge of the village, the forest stretched behind her, mist now dissipating entirely, light touching the treetops with the gentle warmth of morning. She stood for a long moment at her door, hands resting lightly on the frame, feeling the pulse of all she had learned, all she had absorbed, all she now carried as her own. The forest had spoken, and she had responded, not with words, not with action, but with embodiment, with quiet fidelity. Virel closed her eyes and felt the rhythm of the forest deep within her chest, steady and patient. She breathed with it, letting its memory permeate every fiber of her being. Thank you for joining us in the forest tonight. Remember, the tree's secrets live within you now. Carry this calm, this presence into your day and your dreams. If you enjoyed this journey, subscribe to Whispers of the Night for more stories of wonder. Rest well, and may your heart always listen to the quiet voices around you.